Why support the Santa Cruz rioters? On May 1st, 2010, across the United States, black blocs were part of demonstrations in various U.S. cities. In Asheville and Santa Cruz, small-scale rioting led to some arrests and much press regarding violence and vandalism by anarchists. Watching the events in Santa Cruz unfold from afar, and also having spent a degree of time there, I found it clear that the discussion of violence was, as always, one-sided and shallow. Cheers go up on 16th and Mission Street as a bank window is shattered into 1,000 pieces by several people dressed in black with their faces covered. I'm watching the events unfold in San Francisco while a march of several hundred goes by on May Day 2010. Soon after, the march enters into an abandoned continuation school that has sat empty for several years and occupies it. Gentrification in San Francisco at this time is starting to kick back into high gear, and will soon sadly lead to the eviction of many of my friends. Currently, the city has more vacant buildings than homeless people, yet still remains one of the most expensive cities in the US. An hour away down the coast in Santa Cruz, a riot breaks out along one of the busiest tourist streets in town. On the same night, in Asheville, North Carolina, a similar scene plays out in downtown as other May Day demonstrations lead to minor rioting in upscale shopping districts. Several people are arrested and over the next several years go through a drawn-out court proceeding before having their charges dropped. While the cheers as Wells Fargo's window fill gave a clue to the ripening of class anger brewing as the economic crisis deepened, the response is expressed by mainstream press and those in power to the disturbances in Santa Cruz and Asheville were much different. Often people find it hard to fathom why disruption breaks out in a largely white college town, and paint these acts as always the work of outsiders. It is no surprise then that this term outside agitators comes from the civil rights movement directed at the freedom riders going into the South. Furthermore, in the case of Santa Cruz, the media and those in power were quick to draw lines between the rioters and those in the immigrant movement who also protested that day. The immigration protests were the good protesters for staying peaceful, while the outsiders were bad for rioting. What the elites fear most is the coming together of wide ranges of people in uncontrollable ways. The separation between good and bad is not new, and is something that we discuss throughout this book. What I find more interesting, however, is how riots like this open up the possibility of dialogue on the much greater violence that is required to keep upper-scale places like Santa Cruz functioning in the first place. Furthermore, like much of the Bay Area, Santa Cruz sits literally on top of the graveyard of the Ohlone people, who called and still call the area a home before colonization. Like all cycles of abuse, those in power always portray violence enacted by those on the bottom as criminal and insane, while the violence that built and maintains the system is never discussed. If one were to walk along the Pacific Ave in Santa Cruz, the scene of May Day events, one might choose to go inside a large health food store located next to Borders. The food is overpriced, the staff becomes angry if you pop an olive into your mouth or in the salad bar, and the beer selection doesn't include the cheap stuff. If you're bored while waiting to spend $8.67 for a juice and a muffin, feel free to read the latest issue of Pagan Vegan Gardening or whatever they have in stock. Glancing up, however, one comes to see something much more sinister than the lack of Keystone beer, a mural. Not just any mural, but one that angers me. It shows white people farming, then loading produce onto a truck. The field ends next to the ocean and a road begins which leads into Santa Cruz, where a sign for a health food store beckons. If you want a picture of what Santa Cruz is, or what it wants to be, you need only to look at that mural. And if you're too naive not to realize how ridiculous that image is, then perhaps you need to read on. Santa Cruz exists like a colony. The county itself is almost 80% white, with a large section belonging to the upper middle class. The importance of tourism, technological industries, and the university create a neo-colonial relationship with the nearby UCSC campus. Here, working-class Latino labor is pulled from Watsonville, about 30 minutes away, and exploited for just above minimum wage. Rent is out of control, and it takes years to get on Section 8. Without packing swarms of people into a small house, a person with a mediocre job or non-connected parents will not fare well here. This is a city surrounded by beauty, but it's one that only a select few get to experience. The politics of the local area are interesting to say the least. Here, the city council passes resolutions against the Iraq War and the Patriot Act. Marxists and members of the ACLU sit on the city council. The streets are filled with surveillance cameras, and the homeless are routinely pushed out from downtown. After an 18-year ban on immigration police deporting people, Those in power have recently allowed La Migra to break up families and deport working class people through Operation Community Shield. The coastal forest, which draws many people to the area, is also routinely threatened by UCSC's system itself. Recently, the university has announced a long-range development plan to clear much of the forest in order to expand the school. Welcome to Santa Cruz, pack a gas mask and your tote bag. In essence, everything in this place is different, but really it is a shame. Here, people love organics, but they especially love the cheap immigrant labor that supplies it, especially when it stays in Watsonville or in the kitchen. Here, people love being liberals, except when it comes to issues that actually have an effect on class relations in the city. It feels great to slap an anti-war sticker on your car, but those in power are still a class with its own interests. Interests that run counter to ours. Thus here we have repressive politicians who call for more police, higher rents, destroyed forests, more cameras, more development, all while wearing a Shea shirt. An economy needs to be managed. Workers have to keep going to work. And class and race lines have to be firmly kept in place. And if people could just enjoy their kombucha and shut up, things would go a lot smoother. But Santa Cruz, like elsewhere, has a history of resistance. While hippie communes in the 1960s were once found in the woods that surrounded the town, people also bombed banks along Pacific Avenue. In the nearby town of Watsonville, workers have gone on wildcat strikes in the packing plants, and the Brown Berets chapter there has been organized and working with the community for decades. In 2009, students at the UC campus occupied and held the building, helping to kick off the student occupation movement in California, that in turn laid the ground for the larger Occupy movement. Service workers at UC Santa Cruz have also staged wide ranges of strikes and actions as they struggle for better wages and conditions. In a town like Santa Cruz, however, torn apart by lines of race and class, the question is, how to unite, if at all, these antagonisms and these struggles? For me, this is why riots, and in the current period, the Black Bloc, represent such a fear in those in power. On May 1st, International Workers' Day, people gathered along Pacific Ave and marched. People donned masks and quickly began to attack the storefronts of corporate businesses, and a police car was attacked with rocks and paint. What's next? Cries the elites. Will they surround the city hall and burn it to the ground? Will they link up with the migrant workers and take over the fields? Hopefully, yes. The actions by the Black Bloc in Santa Cruz are not that far removed from the countries in Europe where people fight a socialist government that is just as committed to capitalism as the one before it. But here, unlike in Greece, there's not a wide spread of support for revolutionary action. At least not loud, vocal support. In fact, places like Santa Cruz, the most vocal support for a fundamental change in society comes from those who want to preserve capitalism at all costs, albeit a greener, much nicer form. Thus, we see signs on local health food stores that implore us that non-violence is the only way. The left announces the riots because they were violent, but violence, like sabotage, has always been a tool of the proletariat. Strikers in the United Farm Workers destroyed company property, causing Cesar Chavez to go on hunger strike and arm themselves. Rioters in Oakland fought police and destroyed property when Oscar Grant was shot, leading the state to try a police officer in California for murder for the first time in history. In Chicago, workers occupied their workplaces, students in Santa Cruz and beyond did the same. In Stockton and elsewhere, poor people continue to occupy their foreclosed homes and stand firm against the sheriffs with friends and neighbors. The state is already violent. It is up to us to decide how we should respond. Will we be crushed or do we fight? We define the terms of our struggle against capitalism. Us, not liberals and leftists who want to preserve capitalism. Display your billboards, write letters to the editor. We are not in the same struggle. They want more room at the farmer's market. We want an end to wage labor and hierarchical power. Many on the left see class as a misnomer, something to be avoided. Don't talk about work and rent and immigration. Peace, dude, comes through buying the right products, right lifestyle choices, and all that jazz, man. On the other hand, some on the left see the working class as a means to power. They want to use us to build their party and put themselves in the leadership role, a ruling class in waiting. Meet the new boss, same as the old, but with sandals. The breaking of windows materially doesn't get us anything, unless you lucky bastards came up with that Rolex store. But it sends a message that we are not afraid to attack, and in rioting we feel something. We have come to understand that we can't just let capitalism wash over us, or continue allowing ourselves to simply sell our time and labor for a wage in order to survive. To allow everything on this earth to become a commodity, from come to forests. In finding each other and realizing that we don't want this, and realizing that the accepted avenues for change are bankrupt, we understand that in acting together we find new ways of being that can improve our conditions. We find possibility. Today a riot of 200, tomorrow a general strike of 5.9 billion. Next week, the end of industrial capitalism? In the end, we are not interested in breaking windows to show how bad a corporation is, or in decrying police by destroying their cars, but in subverting and negating the totality of life in capitalism, in refusing wage labor and commodity, in destroying the hold and control of capital and the police over all space, in destroying the separations that exist between the proletariat based on race, age, geography, gender, and sexuality. We are not out just to punish capital, but to abolish its dictatorship over all our lives. Across California and in much of the United States, there exist many places like Santa Cruz that appear to go against the grain. But on closer inspection, these towns are just like everywhere else. In fact, when the naked inequalities are hidden behind a veil of liberalism, they appear even more sinister. It is in the moments of open revolt that their true natures are often revealed. Just as when the janitors at the UC campus have gone on strike or carried out job actions, or when the local government has attacked homelessness, the lines are made clearer. So, when we go on strike, when we occupy the building, when we break down the doors and start looting, when someone screams at the top of their lungs, "Peaceful protest!" while cop cars are burning and we tell them, "Shut the fuck up." When the co-op becomes a collective meeting space and the SEIU hall becomes a strike coordinating center, remember that before all of this, someone screamed, "Long live the proletarian movement." At this point, it stopped being the start and started becoming the end.
Start a ride? Do we need to start a ride? Need to start a ride? Do we need to start a ride? Need to start a ride? Do we need to start a ride? Need to start a ride?